With us today is Nikhil Mohan, the founder and CEO of Pivut. Nikhil, would you like to give us a few more details on Pivut itself?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Natalie. And Pivot has been around for a while. We were known, with a different brand name earlier, but now we've moved into Pivot for almost about a year's time. We are the largest executive coaching company in India. We've coached almost about 2,200 executives this year. And that's a large number if you look at executive coaching by itself. And now we are present in India, Singapore, and UAE. So we're sort of spreading our wings, across the board. Pivot is a deep coaching company for forward-looking organizations. We keep calling it that because we see a lot of the play of psychology coming into the picture when you look at human transformation.
Mm-hmm.
And that is when we actually look at deep coaching, and then we call it deep coaching because you need to really be able to create permanent transformations in humans. And deep coaching is the name of the craft for us. And then we also look at organizations across the board. We are not very, industry specific. We're almost industry agnostic across the board. So we have customers like Volvo, PwC, organizations in very, very different, spaces. So you've got consulting, you've got manufacturing, you've got BFSI. We work with a few banks here and there. And we also work with a lot of tech organizations. So all in all, a good place to be, and human transformation is the name of the game.
Now tell me, what actually inspired you to start this organization?
I am ex-LinkedIn. I was a very early employee at LinkedIn.
Okay.
I'm ex-Udemy, which is on the skilling side again.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm also ex-Skillsoft. So I know a thing or two about skilling. One of the things, that I started to see, which was quite glaringly evident in my career, Natalie, was that skilling journeys weren't really leading to transformations. And that's when I, kept on thinking about how do organizations end up getting the horse to drink the water. I mean, of course, you can skill them, but how do you end up, doing the transformation, getting through the transformation that you're really looking at? And that's when I started thinking that many of the skilling organizations, which are supposed to, lead you into transformation, they're started by geeks and tech geeks, essentially. So it's almost like you're sending your kid to a school that's started by a furniture company because there are a lot of tables and chairs there.
Yeah, I hear that.
I felt that there has to be a lot of psychology at play when you're looking at humans and when you're looking at transformations at that. And that's where we came into the picture. When we started to look at Pivot, we started to see how can psychology play a big role in transformations which are going to be permanent at that. Skilling is a part of transformations.
Yeah.
And it sort of gives a false sense of completion and false sense of control, to HR leaders. Oh, I've done the skilling, and hence the organization is going to change. But we feel that there's a lot more to transformation than just skilling, and we call them mindsets.
Yeah.
Unless those mindsets are able to shift, you wouldn't have people using the skills that you've gotten them through skilling journeys. So, for example, if I learn a heuristic about critical thinking, I won't use it if I don't have an autonomy mindset. I'll keep coming back to Natalie, who might be my manager, and saying, I'm not able to take this decision. Could you help me? And hence, as a snowball effect to that, you won't actually have an agile organization. In agile organizations, people take decisions.
Yeah.
Those were some of the things that were going on in my mind when we started. But this has been a very rewarding journey because underneath skilling journeys, you need to have mindset shifts.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you have that, you won't be able to actually make transformation happen.
You've mentioned quite a few things there, which I found really, really interesting, particularly the one where you said you had a realization. Now, is there anything in particular that happened that really led you or triggered this realization that, organizations are putting all their employees through these reskilling and training programs, but just nothing happens after? What happened in your life for you to really come to that realization and to really drive you to found this brilliant organization?
Amazing question. So, two things. One thing I kept seeing across when I was at the, crossroads with skilling, companies I talked about LinkedIn Learning. I talked about Udemy and Skillsoft. And I saw that even after signing $1 million contracts, you have the same people going through the same skilling journeys year over year, right? And I felt, well, is this the right way to approach transformations? Because at the end of the day, as an HR leader, you have two battles to run. The first one is go ahead and click on the course.
Yeah.
Right. So I can show usage. But the other battle there is you are essentially looking at only input metrics. Has Natalie completed the course that I've given her or not? Right. And even if you have, what does that mean? Does that really mean you're going to leverage that skill, or it just really moves the needle from your knowledge standpoint? As AI is coming into the picture, knowing is becoming increasingly obsolete. You've probably seen that.
Yeah.
I know something doesn't mean you don't know it, because you can know it in a couple of minutes, because you can go on to a chat GPT model and then create a model and create LLMs on creating more and more knowledge around that. So that's one side that I saw, and that was very stark because a CHRO called me up after signing up a contract, and she said, hey, this is good, but I've not been able to deliver to the KRAs that the business set up for me.
Right.
That was one. The other one was a lot deeper. It was a lot personal for me. And I felt that while we all are, going through our professional life, there is a personal life to us as well. And you can't really switch on, switch off that button. So how do you go about delivering something which changes the individual intrinsically and not superficially? Because I kept seeing, even after changes, people go back to their default.
Yeah.
And leaders are smart people. You write something on the wall, they're going to say, oh yeah, of course I'll subscribe to it. So you'd see somebody coming out of Facebook and then subscribing to Amazon's culture.
Yeah.
And saying, okay, I'm going to still survive here. And that's what happens, only to go back to their default eventually. So what I felt is that the changes have to be a lot deeper, and those mindset shifts, right? So for example, let me talk about ownership as a mindset. And I sit with a lot of CEOs and CHROs on a daily basis where they continue to say, and the words that they generally use is, they don't have the right attitude, right? They don't look at this as their own business. And hence you have statements like, oh, act like an owner. Well, you're still acting as an owner. But unless ownership comes right from within, it's not going to change anything materially. When I feel there is a delegation coming from the HQ and there's a broken pot in the near the elevator, and I'm not responsible for it, but I still get up and I say, hey, we need to fix this, guys. It is not sending the right impression. So that is very identity led. Am I a part of this organization, or am I, really the owner of the organization? So those are some of the bits. And the second one was like an awakening for me. And I said, this is incredibly important and we are getting this wrong. How do we go about fixing this? And I said, there's going to be a solution only in a psychology, book. Apart from that, nothing else can really help us.
Now, leaders. I think leader is a very interesting term because, and I'm sure you can relate to this, but I think a lot of folks, particularly those in the audience, would have had experiences with great leaders, but also maybe not so great leaders, where they're not so much leading, but instead maybe controlling, some would say.
Yeah.
Now, what would a good leader, and this is a double-pronged question, I suppose.
Yeah.
What would a good leader, firstly, how can they inspire a change in attitude? Because that comes from a personal level, right? That's not just a case of, okay, I've learned it, I can implement it. Yeah. That's a very intrinsic change, I feel. It's something that would then scale up to the rest of your life, not just your professional life. So how can a leader inspire change? And secondly to that, what sort of metrics should a leader really be measuring post the assessment? It's all well and good them actually doing the assessments, and yes, 100% completion rate, hooray. But actually, what should we really be measuring post assessments to say, okay, yeah, there's actually been a behavioral change here, and this has had a positive impact on the business, on revenue, whatever it is that we're looking to positively impact.
Again, you've got a good set of questions there. So the first one, how do we inspire? I think it's It's becoming increasingly simpler and glaringly evident as we go into the future. Gone are the days when the leaders had to be, the strongest ones in the room. You can lead with vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
Don't forget, there are a bunch of really smart people that you've hired. And if you expect them to dumb down, after they've come into the organization, that's the wrong expectation to have. So if you are trying to be strong and trying to show that, hey, I don't have any, any weaknesses, and I can do this well, and I can do that well too, they will be, they'll call out the hypocrisy soon. So what I am seeing as a trend over the last at least 4 5 years, organizations where the culture is very, very strongly knit together with the business, a lot of the leaders are actually leading with authenticity. I won't call it vulnerability, but just being authentic, saying, guys, I don't do this well,
Mm.
and you know this. So, for example, I'll just take my own example and let me, point that to me. Um, I'm not a detail oriented person. I'm a very big picture person, which means I do a great job on big pictures, but I'm not the guy who can look at contracts.
Yeah.
And my team knows this. So, everyone in the team knows that, this is not going to Nikhil.
Do not give Nikhil a
Yeah,
contract.
because and I know this, that many of the times these contracts don't come to me because somebody else is looking at them and they're thrashing out the details. So just knowing that my leader also has weaknesses and I'm here to cover their blind spots,
Mm-hmm.
makes them feel they feel a lot of meaning in that, right? So I think that's one way that I'm seeing a lot of effective leaders leading teams. So that's one. On the other side, what was the second part of the question? Could you repeat that?
The second part of the question was around metrics. So
Hmm.
what sort of metrics should leaders really be measuring post-assessment, post whatever this learning program was, to really ensure that there has been a behavioral change as opposed to just 100% completion rates on these assessments?
So there are two things there again. I would say when you look at the metrics, let the metrics be on the behaviors that you see, but give them some time. Because if the shifts are internal, behavior shifts are going to take a little bit time coming up. And behavior shifts are very different for different people. Let me give you an example. Let's say if I am somebody who has courage as an intrinsic thing, I would start to show a lot of behavior shifts very, very fast. I would go into customer meetings and I would probably behave in a slightly different manner. And the leader might be able to see it very quickly and might tap me on my back and say, hey, great job, guys. But then there are people who are just going to try something, not take a lot of risk because there's going to be a behavior change. You are seeing it now, but they have been a certain way for the last 25 years.
Mm-hmm.
So that behavior shift is not going to be a stitch patch job. It's going to come from within. So if it is, for example, a tech leader coming into a meeting with his team and saying, guys, you guys are doing an amazing job. I haven't really thanked you for this, but I really wanted to take this moment and let you guys know that I'm really proud of you guys. That's probably a tech leader trying a little hard and making that impact. So that might happen. I mean, the speed of change per se, when you look at behaviors, takes a little while for different kinds of people. So that's number one. Number two, I think design metrics which are business oriented, but also very human centric. Let me give an example again. So you could say, let's just see, opening a new office, or let's say opening up a new market. And there is a KRA around building innovative products, for example, right? You would need to look at that as a KRA and say, hey, these many number of products that we've launched over this year, but also look at how is it humanly possible for somebody to keep innovating over and over and over again. So you need to be able to look at both the sides and balance this out,
Mm-hmm.
and then design metrics. The other thing is, we also see is a lot of times we don't pay a lot of attention to self-reported feedback. How did Nikhil feel after an executive coaching conversation? And sometimes, many a times, they come out and say, hey, oh, this was amazing. This was life changing. And they come out and they start to implement things because coaching is very action oriented.
Yeah.
We never let you go out of a conversation unless you promise something that you're going to change. And when you come back the next time, the first conversation is about did you try this with your team? Did you try this with your boss?
So
And so
following
on
up
and so forth.
almost, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. And I guess just switching the narrative here, I feel like we focus in a lot on leadership. Now, what if the leader has maybe particularly toxic behaviors? They're the ones that like to be in control. They don't particularly want anyone to almost be better than them. I know a lot of people in the generic workforce do have feedback like that for leaders, but they really, really want to develop. Let's say this workforce are really keen to develop, but maybe their leader isn't quite, enabling that. What advice would you give to those in the workforce
Mm-hmm.
to say, okay, this is maybe how you could approach your leader, or this is maybe, what you could do to develop yourself?
It's an incredible opportunity I see for people who have leaders like that. Of course, as somebody who runs an exec coaching company, I also see this to be a problem with the leader, and we can always come into the picture and understand his
Yeah.
perspective or her perspective. But it's an incredible opportunity for you if you're led by a leader like that to actually manage upwards.
Mm-hmm.
If you and many a times control comes from fear.
Yeah.
Actually, all of the times control comes from fear. So if they are not willing to give you something, you can just understand what is the most important thing to them and then try and help them with that without them asking for it. A very simple exercise that you could follow is write something down and say, "Hey, are these the things that you would want me to do? And are you going to be happy if I do these 10 things?" And if they say yes, then turn the paper around and then give it to them and say, "Hey, can you write the 10 things that you are going to be measured against by your
Okay.
boss? And
Yeah.
how can I help you with those?" Just having those kinds of conversations might just actually turn the tables around, and you will start to see a little bit of trust coming in. Um, Trust can only come in when you become vulnerable. In psychology, by the way, trust is defined as me accepting vulnerability in
Mm-hmm.
the hope that Natalie is going to do the right thing for me when I am not in the room.
Yeah.
So there is a lot of hope and there's a lot of vulnerability, and you got to lead with that for you to be able to get trust from a leader who's control. Who tries to control things too much.
Now, psychology, I'd love to zoom in on this. This
Yeah.
is your secret sauce here. So what I would love to know is, as we've just discussed, change is not only professional change, but also to some extent within the individual's personal life, right? Now, how could we potentially incorporate psychological elements or initiatives or strategies within transformation and L&D programs to really make sure that the change sticks, both in their professional and then also scaling it out to their personal life?
Very interesting question. I keep talking about this fact that when you look at habits, they're calling it now a 21-day rule, right? So you repeat something for 21 days and it starts to become part of your routine.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at skills, they call it 10,000 hours. I don't agree with that. I think it's 10,000 iterations for you to get to a skill. So if I'm trying to learn the guitar, then it's 10,000 changes, iterations that I make to be able to play the song that I want to play.
Mm-hmm.
Mindsets, it can happen in a couple of seconds, right? Only condition that you need to create is a deep conversation. And that conversation can't be about Natalie's role. It can only be about who Natalie is as a person or as a human. So the idea that we have always looked at is how do you change the human and thereby change the role? Because the other way we have tried and failed. And this is coming from somebody who's been there in the skilling industry and transformation industry for a long time. Many a times we do the opposite and feel that that's going to work. What you need to do is create the right conditions. There are three conditions for a deep conversations. The first one is lightness.
Mm-hmm.
The second one is connection. And the third one is vulnerability, right? And that's very innate to humans. So unless you're able to have a deep conversation, the conversation is only going to be at that level. I generally cite this example. If I were to ask you, what do you like eating? What would that answer be?
Oh my gosh, I'm a right foodie. Potentially something Greek. Let's go with a gyros. There we go.
Okay. Now let me turn the question around. If you were to eat the last meal of your life, Natalie, what meal are you going to choose?
Oh, maybe something truffly. Something a bit different.
Yeah.
Maybe?
So there your answer changed, right?
Yes.
Because the first question came from your experiential reality, which is I mean, that's a cached answer. People ask you that, that's the answer that you give.
Yeah.
But the second question, when I asked that, while it's about the same thing, it actually came from your inner reality. You actually thought about what your mother used to cook back, when you were a kid. Did you? Right? So
Yeah.
so you have early food memories, all of that comes in. That's a deep conversation. And that is where change happens. Unless you're able to get to that depth, you wouldn't really see permanent changes happening. So if I were to say, you seem to be a very kind person, Natalie. Are you kind to yourself often?
Yeah, I'd like to think so. Yeah.
Right. So that's the kind of conversation where you would see permanent shifts happen.
Now, what if you have an employee? Now, this is me speaking from a CHR or a HR leader's perspective.
Mhm.
What if you have an employee that is very introverted, maybe finds it quite hard to mix with the rest of the team, but their performance is outstanding? How would you really connect on a level to then be able to have these development conversations with them and drive them even further towards success? How do you really build that connection?
You look at the strength of that individual. Introverts are great communicators, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
They listen a lot better than extroverts, right?
Yeah.
So because they listen a lot better, it's always easier for you to be able to have a conversation because they're listening to you very intently. They speak less, compared to the others, and they don't mingle too much, but they understand the context of a place a lot more because they're observing all the time, right? They are probably one of the best people you'd probably take advice from, right?
Yeah.
They're also the great source of feedback. And I'm calling this out two different way because advice is different and feedback is got some negative connotations to it sometimes. But these are the people you generally want to depend on. And if you give them that particular role in the team, they're going to do great. So if you're going to be building a plan and you bring in this individual and you say you understand this business well, you'll actually see insights coming from them. The other point is introverts might not open up in a large setting with a lot of people, but in one-to-one conversations, they can they can start to do amazing work.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk business. I know a big focus for HR, and particularly in the Middle East, is really to make HR strategic as
Mhm.
opposed to what it was traditionally, which is a more administrative type role. Now, with strategy means that HR is slightly more involved on the numbers side, on the revenue side, on the cost side.
Mhm.
Now, what would, in your sort of opinion, what would you say are the most costly mistakes that HR or L&D leaders make when it comes to really planning for some sort of an L&D strategy that maybe doesn't go so well? What would you say the most common mistakes are of costing that company?
So one of the things that I continue to see is a very primitive, but I think it still is sort of carrying on, is how HR defines itself. HR is not a support function the way I see it. HR is, I would say, the architect of an organization. They figure out what's going to be where because it's the people and they know this well. That's one. The other thing I think HR also needs to start defining themselves as is we cover for capability and people blind spots of all the leaders because everyone else is now focused on the business and the ones who run the business, which is everyone, which is the people. You can have a blind spot or two for those people. You can just start thinking only business and saying, hey, this is the dollar, we're going to build something for $1 and sell it for two. But unless you are people centric and you have them inside, you would not be able to go far. So I think they need to start defining what they do so well, as they continue to, cover for the blind spots that CEOs have. or capability blind spots that CROs and CTOs have, and they do a great job at that. It's just that they don't come to defining it so well, and you end up calling yourself just as a support function. But once you start to change this language, you will start to see that the board meetings are going to be a lot more fun for you. Because otherwise, anything that goes wrong, you can always blame it on the people, right? And it's
Yeah.
easier to blame it on the people and then saying, oh, there's a capability gap right there. So that's number one. That's what I would say. Now, when you look at how do they come closer to the business and build L&D strategies which are closer to the business, is have business a skin in the game first. Call them in when you're designing something and you say what you think about this. We're doing a large project with a culinary company, which does a lot of syrups and stuff with a global brand. And what we said is that hey, people who are going to go through the exec coaching, almost like CC minus one levels, we said before we even go into designing something, I'd like to call out about 5 or 10 champions from that team and say, do you think this makes sense? And then they came in and they called out certain things which weren't even necessary. And they said, yeah, this is not something I would want. I mean, in fact, we don't think this is something that we look at. We look at something else, and that's the gap.
Right.
So you need to have them, and that's also de-risking it for the CHRO, because you're bringing in the business and saying, hey, what do you think? And you were, as in Narnia, he said a very interesting thing. Don't cite the magic to me, the witch, because I was there when it was, the book was being written.
Yeah.
So they need to be there for them to be able to see a shift. And then, of course, they become a partner with you. They're saying, how's it going? And you're saying, oh, yeah, what you suggested makes sense. And what you suggested makes sense too to the CHRO. And I think they need to be at the table for you to be at the table eventually. So, yeah.
Yeah. It's funny you mentioned that actually, because I feel in the conversations I've had over the past few days with my network that I sort of regularly catch up with, it's actually been quite a big talking point that maybe HR as a function doesn't maybe communicate that well with the other departments. And they absolutely should, right? Because people are in all departments. Now, I think what would be really, really interesting, both for my own knowledge as well as those watching, but also how do you see L&D programs or transformation programs developing in collaboration with these different departments? How do you see that partnership moving forward? What should it ideally look like?
HR, and I might sound anti-establishment, but I'm not. I'm on the HR side. I'm just seeing it from a slight bit of distance. HR needs to become the doctor, not the chemist. There's a very big difference, and there's a very trusting conversation that you have with the doctor. The more the doctor asks you, hey Natalie, you talked about this, and do you also have a stomach issue? And you say yes. And then you say, you also have this, and you say yes. And the more they ask you the right questions, the more trusting the conversation becomes, because you think they know it well, and HRs know it well. It's just that we are not having that conversation. What we are doing is we are dishing out the pills. What we're saying is, hey, oh, okay, if you have this issue, let me go ahead and give you this, and this will solve. But having them come into a conversation and having them to talk about some of the issues that they're facing, and then also taking their buy-in from the from the word go. The other thing that I think we also need to do as HR, function, is look at building a lot more closeness with the C levels at the top and asking them for their opinion a lot more. It's hard to get their time, but it also de-risks the whole thing for us. And I don't think that happens quite a lot. In a lot of the learning journeys that we design, which are tailor-made to customers, many a times in exec coaching and other learning journeys at C-1 or C-2 levels, we bring in the business. We call them to bring the business into the conversation, because they will bring that insight that we'll need to ship. We were talking to a construction equipment company back in India, and they mentioned something around them not being able to stitch together large deals. So you've got a part of the business which sells one construction equipment, and another part of the business which sells something else. But if you could go to a contractor who's building roads, he needs both or she needs both, right? So how do you go about stitching that together? This came as an insight to us from the business, and the CHRO never mentioned it. So I think if they have a seat at the table, they'll do a good job. And they are all about pain, right? They'll always come and say, hey, this is the pain area, that's the pain area. And it's good because you get them there and then let them, talk about that. So I think they need to be here, they need to be more involved. And many a times it's hard to get their time, but you should tell them that if you want me to run this journey, like the doctor tells you, you got to do some changes in your diet if this is going to work. Let that be that.
Now, having a seat at the table, we know that that's incredibly important. And I know something that is actively being worked on by a lot of different companies in the Middle East, where HR is really trying to break through into the C-suite, right? Now, if you were to speak to a CHRO, and you likely have had these conversations with your existing clients, but how would you advise them to really start building those relationships among the C-suite to make sure that they do have a seat at the table, they do have a say in budgets specifically for L&D or other HR initiatives? How would you really advise them to break through into that C-suite lineup?
Great question. 3 words from me. I think call it out. I think many a times CHROs are not calling things out too much. C levels are, drowning in information, but they're also, starving for insights. And many a times these insights can come from the CHRO, because they see the business from a distance and they see what they are doing wrong. So that's one, I would say, and I think it's important that we start talking about it and saying, if we are going to be building that part of the business, then we need to be building this capability 2 years ago.
Yeah.
Because eventually a C-level is going to get up and say, hey, we're not able to deliver this well. How are you really thinking about doing this? Because your people are not going to be able to do that. And that word is, very toxic when somebody comes and says your people to a CHRO, because they've just distanced themselves away because they are the business and they're saying you're not able to deliver onto this. So I think they are not using the insights that that they ought to, and we don't really see a lot of that happening across the board. The other one that I would always say is that when they're coming into the role, of course, many a times it's already late, but having those conversations with the C levels is saying, next couple of quarters, of course, I'm going to be doing, the BAU, but what is it that you are trying to build? And many a times they don't even know. They don't even have an understanding of where the business needs to get to. And CEOs and CROs and CTOs, for example, know a lot of that and say, this is what we are going towards in the next 2 years. Can you help us build a ramp towards that from a capability standpoint, from people standpoint? That's always good to know. So having those conversations again and asking them pointed questions is the only thing. I also see sometimes we are very de-risked. We don't want to take a lot of risk and go and ask these kind of pointed questions.
Yeah.
But we generally see a lot of times businesses, appreciate that when the CHRO comes and asks them these questions.
I love that you said calling it out. So I think a lot of HR leaders now, as you say, they tend to stay a little bit more quiet. Now, if you were to say, okay, right, Mr. CHRO, you do need to call it out. Is there any particular metrics or KPIs that you would really say that the other C-suites really embrace? If they were to come to these C-suites, yeah, this is these KPIs, this is why we need investment, or this is the sort of decision we should make. What would you say your top 3 KPIs or metrics would be that the other C-suites really, really appreciate?
I would say metrics would be calling out, first of all, the gaps, knowledge gaps. So, for example, if we've already been trained on something and not on something else, then we need to call those out. But coming from exec coaching, I would also say calling out the mindsets that we need to develop with the workforce. If we do not have an entrepreneurial mindset, we would not have an innovation happening. If you don't have an ownership mindset, you wouldn't have agility in the organization. And I can go on and on and on about this, but they need to start calling it out, saying, if you see this 2 years later, then we need to start building this capability, in the workforce, today. Whether it is for talent which is already present in the organization or you're acquiring talent from outside, it's always a struggle getting getting the skills and mindsets right. So yeah, putting that out there. So that will be the first one. Second one I would say is, I don't know what will replace that for every, it's different strokes for different folks, but many times you need to look at what are the metrics which are the on the other side of input metrics. So when you're looking at input metrics, it's only the completion rates for courses, and so forth. You're looking at how many people attended the course, how many people completed the course, or how many people did the assessment after and pre the course. But these are input metrics. They only give you an indication of how much time is spent on skilling themselves, but also do assessments which are delayed. So basically, after I've done the course or after I've gone through a program, can I do a 3 month assessment 3 months later, which can give me a sense on, has the learning stuck with this individual?
Yeah.
So they don't do that often, and that's something that I see as another gap area. Third one I would say is also look at the self-reported feedback a lot more, because many a times it's just that, oh, these 25 people need to go through this, but what is their experience like, right? Talking about their own experience, many a times people are either outside of a training room on a call or inside the training room on a laptop. Are they really engaged through the journey is the question. So you need to get their feedback and also course correct with the partner, whichever partner you have. I think these are important metrics to, for you for us to look at.
For sure. And, just really honing in on this idea of mindsets. Mindsets are growing in popularity and importance. I think it's a bit of a buzzword nowadays, particularly among my generation, the Gen Z sort of generation, who are all about, wellness, mindsets, the way we think about things.
Yeah.
How do you see, from a sort of psychological standpoint, what elements of psychology do you really see in the next sort of 5 to 10 years being weaved in to these different transformation and development or reskilling programs to really ensure that there is a solid development in mindsets as well as performance? Just because, nowadays a lot of people would say some training can be a bit of a memory test, but I think intrinsic is happening. It's just remember, assessment done, ticked off.
Yeah.
How are we really using psychology to transform those mindsets as well as the professional work?
Another great question. I think one thing that's happening, and let me take um, one event as the fulcrum of this answer that I give you. If you look at COVID, it actually changed a lot of people's lives, right? And I would say, in some way, everyone's life, right? If you're an adult today, you've gone through COVID and you've experienced something that you haven't experienced in the past.
Yeah.
Post-COVID, there have been three things which have been on a decline psychologically. The first one is resilience. So, resilience in psychology comes from optimism. For another day, but we can talk about that. Second one is cognitive agility. My ability to start looking at something from a different lens, start framing something or reframing something differently. And the third one is focus. And across these three, we continue to see a lot of play for psychology to come in, right? What we use is something called as the science of what's, right? It's called the positive psychology. The father of positive psychology, Dr. Martin Seligman, and his theories around how do you create change and how do you create flourishing humans, right? And that's the intent. Unless I can create a flourishing human, I can't have a flourishing leader.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what we go by. While it sounds very soft and squishy, that's exactly what we are a big proponent of, saying, stop looking at the leaders as just the role. If you want to make changes and if you want to make transformations which will stick, you need to look at the human first. So with these three elements in the psyche of an individual declining, it becomes even more important for us to weave psychology into transformations. So for example, we have products and programs that we define for C-suite, which help them with all these three and some more. Especially in the C-suite, you see people who have spent 20 years in the same company, some people who spend 10, 15 years in the same company. And if you spend that kind of time in a place, you become that place. it's very hard to change.
Yeah.
You're not designed to change. You're just designed for the BAU that you've been running.
Yeah.
So how do you go about making that shift? And that's where we weave in positive psychology,
Yeah.
the signs of change, signs of what's right, and bring in elements which are psychologically proven, evidence based, and we are able to leverage those across the board, and we are able to sort of color the entire journey through that.
And where does optimism come into play here? I'm very intrigued.
Now you started that. So optimism, so in psychology, resilience is defined as optimism. My ability to see something as a blip and saying, okay, I'm going to be past that. Somebody with low optimism, and optimism, by the way, is genetic as well, 50% of it. So God help you if your parents were pessimists. But then there is something called as learned optimism. So you've got some ray of hope there. So in psychology, resilience is defined as optimism. Your ability to see something and saying, oh, this is local, I'm going to go past this. And this is not very intrinsic to a lot of people nowadays. Okay. And that's where we come in with our theories around learned optimism, on how can you see a different perspective. And that's where coaching comes into the picture too. When I can say, Natalie, I see this differently. What about you? And you'd say, why? And I would say, you've done this in the past. You've done amazing work in the past. But when you're seeing this seems like very small and you're going to be past this in 6 months. What do you think? And that question, Natalie, is not going to leave you. Right.
Yeah.
Because you keep thinking and saying, oh, the all hell broke loose and the world's coming to an end and all of that. But actually, when my coach tells me saying, you have done this in the past and I can see this, why are you so worried about this? Because this is a very small thing. That's where, you start to shift your mindset. So with these three things going down, we are also trying to bolster ourselves to make sure that our programs and products are attending to this. So we've got a product called Mandate for Relevance. Mm-hmm. While it's been designed, the naming convention is very interesting, but what we have done in that is, how do you go about looking at your relevant self in the future, and what are some of the changes that you're going to make? And there is a lot of optimism that comes in. There's a lot of resilience that's focused, into the product. So some, products around that. We also have programs for women leaders specifically, when they want to go and become more resilient, and there are cultural nuances, for them, which are in their way. There are limiting belief systems which are in their way. So how do you go past that and say, okay, you can be more resilient than that? So there's some of that work that we are doing on this.
Now, what about for those assuming that they're doomed and they are 50% pessimist and they cannot go off on this optimism mountain? What would you say to those? Because to some extent, if you need to be partially optimistic in order to essentially develop, can that be unlearned? Because you did say it was genetic. Can it be unlearned, or is it if you are slightly pessimistic, it's determined?
Actually, all of this, you can actually help them to a great degree, because a lot of learned optimism can come into the picture. And I said 50% of it is genetic. Mm-hmm. So a lot of that could also be your own life experiences. Let's say if you are already low on the scale and the life experiences have taught you not to trust a specific gender, for that matter, or a specific set of people, then eventually you'll hold everyone to that barometer. That doesn't really change too much. But in the longer run, if you start to have those conversations and ask them to take actions and test their theories back, they will themselves prove themselves wrong. So you would generally start to see that shift happening with people. But again, short answer is call us.
Very interesting. Okay. And I realize we're maybe what is a very big topic and a meaty topic. We may only be able to skim the surface of that bone. But I suppose my closing question to you today, if a HR leader is really looking to launch a transformation program of some sort, a reskilling program, whatever that looks like, what would you advise for the top 5 questions that they should really be asking both themselves and organization leaders before pressing go on that project?
I think they need to start realizing that humans intrinsically work uh, with people that they like. Um, Authenticity is the way to go. I have seen zero, um, ecosystems. Uh, and when I say ecosystems, it's my customers, and we've got a lot of them here who have been able to ride that tide without having people really feel as they are the owners of that business. That ownership will not come in unless you are able to drive people. And people are driven by whether we like it or not. We are humans first and then our roles. And I think a lot of that goes into that statement because many a times we are seeing it the opposite. We are looking at the role and then the human. Unless you are able to say, hey, is this leader really happy in the way they are? Is there a lot of resistance with their role? Are they going back home happy? Are they coming to the office happy? While these sound as soft and squishy kind of questions, but I'm sorry, we need to start looking at that. And that's the shift that Pivot is trying to create. And we've been great at this. It's not like initially we had, of course, troubles trying to make sure that customers understand it. But now the day and age we are in, with urban isolation, um, with people being pulled out from their countries and then working in different countries, it's a lot riding on them, and you need to make sure that they understand. The leaders understand. The humans first, and then the role. And I think that's incredibly powerful as a statement to make when you go back and you start to lead authentically, saying, "Guys, I don't do this well. You know this. Why don't we?" That's a minor shift, but as you start saying that, you'll start to see your 360-degree, assessments start to shift because people will start to say, Natalie is different today. And I don't know, why did she say that? This is not Natalie. And that's a very good sign because you're really changing. So I think it's also the leaders who need to take that onus on themselves and start leading in this fashion because eventually the people will start to call out the hypocrisy and say, he's not that strong on that side. Why does he want to go into this? And it's not his strong area. You need to actually start being a little vulnerable and then leading with that.
I love it. Amazing. Well, there you have it, folks. So we had a very, very in-depth conversation with Nikhil on organizational transformation as well as reskilling initiatives and upskilling for that matter. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we're looking forward to hopefully seeing you again soon. And of course, Nikhil, I know that we'll be working together in the future again, so please do come and check him out at one of the HRSC editions, and we will speak soon. Thank you so much.